I still remember the exact moment I realized I couldn't look at him anymore during sex. And the shame of that realization has been eating me alive ever since because I love Marcus, I really do. But something inside me broke 6 months ago and I don't know how to fix it or if I even should try. It started the night of the accident. Though calling it an accident feels like I'm letting myself off too easy, like I'm trying to dodge the weight of what I actually did to him. We were driving back from his sister's wedding in Portland, both of us a little buzzed but not drunk. At least that's what I told myself then and what I still tell myself now when I can't sleep at night. And I was behind the wheel because Marcus had been drinking champagne all evening and I'd only had 2 glasses of wine spread out over 5 hours. The highway was empty, one of those long stretches through Oregon where you don't see another car for miles, just darkness and trees and the occasional deer that makes your heart jump into your throat. And we were talking about the wedding, about how beautiful his sister looked, about whether we'd ever have something like that for ourselves. Marcus had his hand on my thigh, that casual, intimate gesture that couples do without thinking, and he was telling me about this job opportunity in Seattle. Something that could change everything for us, more money, better life, maybe finally enough to think about getting married and having kids. And I was listening, but also I wasn't because I was tired and the road was hypnotic, and my mind kept drifting to this stupid argument we'd had earlier about his mom. He asked me a question, something about whether I'd be willing to move to Seattle, and I turned to look at him when I answered, just for a second, maybe 2 seconds, because that's what you do when you're having a real conversation with someone you love. You look at them, you make eye contact, and in those 2 seconds the deer came out of nowhere. I saw it in my peripheral vision and jerked the wheel hard to the left, too hard, way too hard, and the car spun and Marcus yelled my name and then we hit something, a tree or a post or I don't even know what, but it was on his side, the passenger side, and the sound of the impact was like the world ending, metal crunching and glass exploding and Marcus screaming, and then silence, the worst silence I've ever heard in my life. He was conscious but his face was covered in blood and his right eye was wrong, everything about it was wrong. And I was screaming for help and calling 911 and holding his hand and telling him it would be okay even though I didn't know if it would be okay. Even though I knew this was my fault, entirely and completely my fault. The surgeons did what they could but his right eye was too damaged. Something about orbital fractures and optic nerve damage and retinal detachment. Words that still make me feel sick when I think about them, and they had to remove it. They fitted him with a prosthetic a few months later, a really good one, expensive as hell. And honestly, if you don't know to look for it you might not even notice, but I know I always know, and that's the problem I can't escape from. Marcus handled it better than I did, better than anyone could have expected really, and he kept telling me it wasn't my fault, that it was just an accident, that the deer could have appeared no matter who was driving, but we both know that's not entirely true. We both know I was distracted, that I turned my head at the wrong moment, that I overcorrected, that every choice I made in those crucial seconds was wrong. He went through all the stages, anger and grief and depression, and I was there for all of it, holding him when he cried, listening when he raged about what he'd lost, supporting him through the physical therapy and the psychological counseling, and slowly over months, he came back to himself, to us, and he said he'd forgiven me even though I never asked for forgiveness, because how do you ask for forgiveness for something like that? We started having sex again about 4 months after the accident, and the first time was gentle and careful, both of us treating each other like we might break. And it was okay, it was fine, I told myself it was fine, but there was this moment when he was above me and I was looking up at him and I saw his face, saw the prosthetic eye that doesn't move quite right, that doesn't catch the light the same way, that doesn't crinkle at the corners when he smiles, and something in my chest tightened. And I had to close my eyes. I told myself it was just adjustment, that I needed time, that it was natural to feel strange about such a big change, but it kept happening. Every single time we were intimate I found myself unable to look at him, closing my eyes or turning my head or finding excuses to change positions so I wouldn't have to see his face up close. The guilt of this secondary betrayal is almost worse than the guilt of causing the accident in the first place, because what kind of person can't look at the man they love, the man they hurt, the man who forgave them, during the most intimate moments of their relationship? I started having panic attacks before sex, my heart racing and my palms sweating, and I'd make excuses, headaches or exhaustion or stress from work, anything to avoid that moment when I'd have to confront my own shallow, horrible reaction to his appearance. Marcus noticed, of course he noticed, and about 3 weeks ago he asked me directly what was wrong, whether I still found him attractive, whether his injury had changed how I felt about him, and I lied. I looked him in the eye, his one real eye and his one prosthetic eye, and I lied and said everything was fine, that I was just stressed about work, that it had nothing to do with him. But he knew, I could see it in his face, the way his jaw tightened and his shoulders fell. And since then there's been this distance between us, this careful politeness, like we're roommates instead of lovers, instead of partners who were talking about marriage 6 months ago. I've tried everything I can think of to fix what's broken inside me, therapy and meditation and those stupid affirmations about loving someone for who they are inside. And intellectually I know that Marcus is the same person, that his personality and his kindness and his sense of humor and everything I fell in love with hasn't changed, that the only thing that's different is cosmetic, superficial, meaningless in the grand scheme of what makes a person who they are. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two completely different things. And my body responds before my brain can intervene, flinching away, tensing up, going dry when it should be responding, and I hate myself for it. I hate myself so much I sometimes think about ending things just to spare him from being with someone so broken and shallow and cruel. Last night he tried to initiate again and I couldn't go through with it. I just started crying, and he held me and asked me to please tell him the truth, to please be honest with him about what was happening. And I almost did, the words were right there on my tongue. But how do you tell someone that you can't look at them, that the injury you caused has made them difficult for you to desire, that you're disgusted with yourself but also can't seem to overcome this visceral reaction? So I told him I needed time, that I was still processing everything. And he said okay, but I could see the resignation in his face, the understanding that this might be the beginning of the end for us. My best friend Sarah knows some of it, not all of it but enough, and she told me I need to either get over it or let him go, that it's cruel to stay with him while feeling this way. But she doesn't understand that I can't imagine my life without him, that he's my person, my home, my future, except for this one horrible thing that I can't seem to fix. I've thought about whether it's really about the physical appearance or whether it's about the guilt, whether every time I see his face I'm confronted with the permanent evidence of what I did to him, whether I'm avoiding his gaze not because of how he looks but because of what looking at him makes me feel about myself. Maybe that's closer to the truth. Maybe the prosthetic eye is just a mirror reflecting my own failures and inadequacies, my own responsibility for irreversibly changing his life. And maybe if I could forgive myself I could look at him again without feeling like I'm drowning in shame. But self-forgiveness feels impossible when the evidence of your mistake is looking back at you every single day, when the person you hurt is sleeping next to you every night, when you know that no matter how much therapy you do or how many times he says it's okay, you took something from him that he can never get back. This morning he was getting ready for work and I was watching him from the bed, and he caught my eye in the mirror and smiled at me, that same smile that made me fall in love with him 3 years ago. And for just a second I saw him the way I used to, whole and perfect and mine. But then he turned toward me and the morning light hit his face at an angle that made the prosthetic obvious and I had to look away, had to pretend I was checking my phone. And I saw the hurt flash across his face, before he could hide it. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know if this is something I can overcome or if I'm fundamentally too broken, too superficial, too damaged by guilt to be the partner he deserves. And the worst part is that I know he would understand if I left. He would probably even think it was his fault somehow, that he wasn't enough anymore, when the truth is that he's everything and I'm the one who's not enough, who's never been enough, who proved on that dark highway 6 months ago that my moment of inattention could destroy everything we'd built together. Part of me wants to force myself to push through it, to fake it until I make it, to keep having sex with my eyes closed and hope that eventually my heart catches up with my head and I can see him the way I used to. But another part of me knows that he deserves someone who looks at him with desire and love, not someone who has to close their eyes to get through being intimate with him. I'm trapped between my love for him and my inability to fully express that love physically. And I don't know if that makes me a terrible person or just a human one, struggling with the complicated reality that we're not always as enlightened or as unconditionally loving as we'd like to believe we are.